To start, really, one of the facts I wanted to start with is that test automation done right can actually save your testing time by a conservative 30%. That is actually backed by the success story of Astellas. And it's really about making it even better in the long term. And this presentation we're going to talk about focus on one aspect of how we can make test automation successful. But it's important to keep in mind that there is a lot of different pieces, and in terms of what are the ways to do test automation, and we'll focus on this. So essentially, it's important to understand what you're going to see out of this presentation is really how test automation can help you focus on the product and leveraging the product instead of really testing it. And then from the technical user, super user, it helps really reduce the risk of regression related to any changes. So I think there is no secret here. And at the end of the day, test automation is really to reduce risk and accelerate the product delivery and save time and money. So everyone has something to essentially win there. So the agenda for today is I'm going to go through a couple of slides in terms of why test automation, why it makes sense to do it, and show a couple of ROI of essentially the things the result you can achieve with test automation, and then we'll go through the Astellas success story, which is the main topic for this session. And from the project sponsor manager perspective, when you think about test automation and when you think about building a case to justify, why I need test automation versus manual testing, and what type of thing I want to test, and you have endless list of subjects, it's really I like to put it as a what if, really as a what if format, so that you can really in that case, for example, what if I could improve the overall quality of implementation by automating specific mission-critical functional tests, right? So when you're designing for automation, you can have different strategy to say, I want to test exactly the UI, exactly the way the business user is going to perform those various scenarios, or I want to make sure I'm testing all the backend, even all the edge cases, and as time goes on, I keep increasing, all the coverage I'm having, and really at the end of the day, again, it's the test automation is to reduce the time it takes to deliver service patch and upgrades, and it's really a long-term thing in a sense, because you keep adding once it's well done, you just keep building on top of what you're done before, and it's it's very actually strategic to that regard. And essentially, one of the other thing is when you want to do the end-to-end test, one of the key piece where test automation adds values is it's really hard sometimes to make sure your system works from loading the chargeback, loading the membership, loading the catalog, going to the contract, and doing all those actions, which varies from business to business, and investing more time in understanding what's going to reduce our overall risk and what makes sense for us to spend time, because this is so critical to our business. Then you're going to come up with a series of a subset of test automation, but this is really going to help you focus on thinking about next big things, And above anything, it's again, at some point, replacing the manual test by automated test is another. So from the system owner perspective, it's really about making sure basic functionality works and backend process works. And I don't want to have to find issues once I've done those 25 tests and redo the test cycle, right? From the developer perspective, because sometimes we're not seeing that, it's not that obvious, but coming from 7 years of development, I can tell you that if you find issues earlier, once you try to troubleshoot the issue, because the number of changes that happen in that time window is smaller, you actually have an exponential return on investment in terms of how fast the bug or the issue is identified. And that sometimes gets lost in transaction to only focus on the execution part, but it's actually a mechanism to get faster feedback and, you know, make progress, better progress. And the other thing is, from the test automation developer, is you want to make sure that you're building reusable components. So, you know, Bruce and Stacey are going to talk about this, where it's a right level of configuration to test your mission critical functionality as well as your business end-to-end user flow, essentially. So this is ROI of test automation in one slide that shows you, you know, it's really directly correlated to the number of cycles that you're going to be doing. And that kind of shows you sure, it's an upfront investment, like we can see 80 hours versus 16 hours, but hey, if we're going to do 12 cycles, we may as well invest upfront and do that in a risk-based fashion where when you start your project, you want to know what's going to be those key areas that I want to make sure are going to work moving forward, and I want some system to check that every time I deploy anything, you know, because at this point, we have all those layers which start all the way from the, you know, hardware, which goes up, you know, up the stack, and you want to make sure any change you're making doesn't break anything. And, you know, from the functional perspective, but then there is more around the performance, which is something we need to think about. When we're talking about, you know, performance things we're seeing, it's really the control of how changes affect performance is one aspect that if you automate your test in a structured way, you can keep track of. And again, because of the smaller window, it's actually faster to resolve the issues. So that's the other aspect of it. And so now I'm going to let Bruce and Stacey talk about the Astellas success story. And they actually leverage QTP to implement their business functional test. And I'm just going to...
Thank you, JB. JB has a passion for testing, and so do I. Hello, welcome everyone. Let me tell you a story that started from a dream a few years ago. The vision for automated testing at Astellas started in mid-2010, right in the middle of our upgrade from 5.2 to 5.4. We said to each other, why couldn't we automate this stuff? Well, 4 system test cycles and a user acceptance test cycle showed the planned and repeatable test cases were definitely needed. Our users spent 50% of their time for more than 3 months just testing in all of the cycles, not just UAT, testing the basic functionality of the system, just to confirm that they could still do their work after the upgrade was done. We believe we needed to replace their time and effort testing the basic functionality with an automated solution. So this is the Astellas success story. And these are the 3 people, there are actually more than the 3, but the 3 workers who made it possible. Now let me say this is functional regression testing of the user interface, which is a complement to the back-end automated testing that JB talked about Tuesday in the CAB meeting. These provide the full range of testing required to make implementation successful. And now, at this time, I'd like to introduce my partner in crime, my partner, Stacey, whose leadership and support was critical to the success of this effort. Stacey. She will talk about the history of Model N at Astellas and why Astellas wanted to do this.
Thanks, Bruce. Just to give you guys some context, on Astellas. So Astellas has been a Model N customer since 2007. We implemented the full suite. We started out with version 5.2, and like most of you, Model N is considered SOX compliant, so we use it to pay our incentive rebates, managed care, government pricing, and setting up contracts. And since implementation, we've paid approximately $12 billion in sales with Model N, so it's a very important system to us. So why did Astellas undertake the effort of QTP? Overall, I think JB said this and Bruce has mentioned it. All of us have lived it and experienced it as far as implementing or upgrading. Your major risk with these projects is testing. And testing, you go through several builds, you go through several cycles, and it's taking up a lot of folks' time, not just business, but also IT. And we spend time focusing on basic functionality or integration, and we don't get time to focus on new functionality and how we can leverage those things. So to prepare for an upcoming upgrade for 5.6, we wanted to make sure we were ready and we had automated testing set up so we could maximize our time and shorten the test cycles. We also wanted to reduce risk and identify issues earlier in the development life cycle so we can address them early on and not discover them 2 weeks before go live when everyone's scrambling to get things out the door. And it also provides transparency. You can link your requirements straight to test cases and then ensure that they're tested. And within those test scripts that are automated, you can clearly see which steps were completed. Sometimes when you go through 5 cycles of testing, and it's 400 test scripts, which is equivalent to 2,000 test scripts at the end, you're not looking as carefully or completing all those steps that you should be. So opening yourselves up to risk. So you ensure that testing's completed and you have a good quality product at the end. So overall, Astellas completed this to prevent a future project overrun, to find issues earlier. And we can use this not only for upgrades, for service packs, just standard smoke tests, environment changes. This takes a lot of time from the business usually when they're doing it manually, but now we can do it automated and save everyone a lot of time and effort. So I'm going to turn it back over to Bruce.
Oops. I have to be careful here. So when you're looking at a major upgrade, you can have 3, depending on the size and the modules you have, you can up to have 3 dedicated testers, plus, and those are IT testers, plus business testers. It's always the forgotten piece. When you're dealing with ROI, sometimes people think just dollars, but it's also productivity time, and it's also lost time, opportunity time by the business. So we estimated one of those testers could be replaced completely with automated tests. And if you actually have an automation expert as a tester, they can not only test, but create more automated tests as you go along. And we found that out. So the major ROI is when you have an upgrade, you can actually save a lot of money. And when we did some estimation, it was between $150,000 and $250,000 in an upgrade. And that might be peanuts actually compared to the cost of an upgrade, but it actually is money, real money. And you can leverage these tests for future upgrades. In fact, when we took our tests, we took 1/6 of our test space and modified them to run under 5.6. And it took a very small amount of time to do that. A lot of people told us we couldn't do it, but we actually got it done. Okay, so we'll hammer this point again. The business testers can then concentrate on the new functionality and not on just seeing whether you press the button in Medicaid and it works. Okay. So, the beginning. Okay, we started with 400 regression manual test cases. In the top right-hand corner is just a subset of the manual binders we had of all of our test cases, and our business testers had to produce manual screen prints for our QA people for every testing cycle. So this was just kind of for effect here, but it shows that there were a lot of, we had about 15 binders that had to be filled, finished, signed off for each test cycle. Okay. So there's the 2000, and the productivity did suffer. There were a lot of things we couldn't do. Okay. And in 2011, we successfully presented the proof of concept. Okay. Now let's talk a bit about where we would use automated tests. Well, the big one there is the upgrade. I kept track of the project plan and the cost for the upgrade. Approximately 50% of the cost was in the testing cycles. So if you can save a small percentage, even 30% of that 50%, that's still a lot of time and money. For service packs, when service packs come in, we run a series of smoke tests, and we adjust some of our automated tests to actually fix or actually test the bugs that they fixed. Okay, so that's really a fair amount of the cost. So some of them still have to be done manually, but if you can save some time on that, that's time to market. We have other releases with local fixes and all that too as well, local fixes and environment changes. Now this was a major thing. Whenever they changed the environment, whenever they said, we're changing a switch, we'd like you guys to test your system. Oh, we're now going to Windows Server, you have to test your system. We can just run a series of smoke tests. Can I sign on? Can I do a report? Can I do the basic things? And it's done in a fraction of the time, so you don't have to be sitting in there Saturday morning or Sunday afternoon trying to test these things. So, major applications of this. Okay, so HP Quality Center and Quick Test Professional. This is the software, and we are basically concentrating on Quick Test Professional because this is the one that actually creates the test scripts. Okay. And there were a lot of challenges. I will tell you about the challenges that we faced in trying to get this running, because when people said it couldn't be done, that was actually a worry that we did have. Okay, so we captured the process from the business workflow in QTP. We created reusable components. You don't have to keep creating how to log in, how to do approvals, how to do things. We created reusable components, and every test case is controlled by an external parameter file. So I can test this type of contract, go in, change the parameters, test a different type of a contract. Okay. Okay, so the project started in September 2011. And over the first 2 to 3 months, we installed the software, installed it again, installed it again. We set up the development environment. We set up the framework, which I'll quickly present near the end. And we went through with the business on the different modules we had and said, which one of these test cases are really essential? Which ones represent the work that you do? So we whittled those 400 test cases, which they were really complaining about having to do anyway, down to 160. Okay. We had to rewrite all of the test cases in detail. The old test plans used to say, create a contract and create it on this type, and those are the 2 steps. We had to tell exactly the automator how to do it. It's great training for you if you ever want to do that. If you don't know how to create a contract, just write a test case for it. Okay, the requirements were reworked to align with the test cases. In other words, you had these requirements and you said, okay, for this requirement, this test case is going to test for it. So we have a requirements test case matrix. Okay, there was a 45-day period to get it going. Okay, so it's like when you're sending your boat out to sea, you're not quite sure whether you're going to make it across the ocean. We made it across the ocean. But the first few paddles were nerve-wracking. Phase A, we had 70 test cases that we completed them. We did totally automated and approved and signed off. And we also had to create a standard operating procedure with QA in order to actually do this because they didn't have a procedure for automated testing. That was fun. Phase B, finishing 120 test cases and finishing the matrix, completing UAT of all the test cases. Okay, that little thing on the right there at the bottom actually just shows the 12 major contract test cases that we have for the different types of contracts, the GPO access contracts, the independent, the firm price contract, amending a contract, saving as, and doing the, on and on. Our challenges, this is one of the biggest slides of the presentation here. What were the roadblocks in our way? And they're not in any particular order. On the top, the government module, when you're talking technically, when the government module comes up, it presents the data in a tabular format, but it's not. The objects behind the seat are not in table. They're actually one big long text string that the application pops into that table. So you can't in your QTP say, go to the 3rd row to the 5th. If there's 30 over there, you have to go to the 65th one and get it. So that was a challenge, but We wrote a little function to be able to go find which one do you want. Okay. The properties of the object are not static. So if you're looking at an object and then it refreshes the screen, it'll add a little suffix onto the object. So it's not the same. Found a way around that. QTP is a cute little recording thing. You press the button and it actually records. It records all of the objects in the screen. It only records half of them on the model end screen. So you actually have to go in and manually add that. Another challenge. Some action buttons, when you say click on them and the button would be enabled or disabled, some of those enabled or disabled don't work. So you have to click on it and see whether or not it changed. And if it didn't change, then it must have been disabled. It works. Okay. Performance can be slow. So we had to program in some waits and some exists. In other words, wait until this other object comes up on the next page and then before you start again. That worked. Early in the game, we found out the Quality Center only runs tests in fast mode, meaning that what happens is that if there's any slowdown at all, the test will fail because the objects aren't there yet, there's a problem. And so therefore, we run all of our tests out of QTP. All of them. Quality Center 11 has that ability, but we don't have that yet. So we still have the plan to actually do that. So we had to use descriptive programming to actually do this. So what we did is we created functions and reusable components. And once we got underway, things were a lot faster. I want to tell you that the time to automate a test case is so much faster now than it was in the fall of 2011. I just sent a test case this morning to the developer to finish, and it keeps popping up on my machine. She's almost done it. It's just this afternoon. So it's actually pretty fast. Okay. We wanted to have the government, in the government module, when you wanted to compare the end result of the calculation to maybe an external file. That didn't really work well in QTP, so we exported it out, and we have a utility to compare these two Excel files or CSV files to see which cell is different. So that was kind of cool, too. How we succeeded, we developed a common framework. Every test case runs the same way. We used descriptive programming and module and common functions. On and on. We also had a couple of neat utilities. One was the approval route utility, so that when you change approval routes, you don't have to go in and change your tests. We'll go and say, when I submit for approval, it'll go record and say, these 3 users or groups need to approve, and then it'll call this function, which will go find their user ID, sign on, approve it, sign off, sign on, approve it, and do all of that. You change it from 3 people down to 2, you don't have to change it at all. And another one was the government module. We were doing calculations. We were getting an occasional error. So the aim of the test wasn't necessarily to prove whether there was an error. It was to see whether or not the functionality works. We have a little utility to go in and actually fix the error, knowing full well that the comparison will actually have the difference in that cell, but we allowed it to finish. Now, I'll just quickly run through this one. This is actually our framework, where we have now a couple of them aren't used as much. The function library, where all the shared functions are. So therefore, when you're actually in the test script and you say, I'd like to execute this function, it automatically knows to go to that directory, find that function, and execute that function in the library. The test data is actually the input test data to the test and the parameter file to the test. And as you'll see up here on the right, the test data, way up here, has a different directory for each module. So each module has its own directory. So if you're actually executing a test script in the contract module, it will go to the contract directory in the test data to find the parameters. And if you're requesting any input files, they're there. Test output, any output files, test results. The result of every test has an Excel sheet that says every single step on this test passed or had a warning or failed, and all of the automated screen prints. So we automatically produce all the screen prints. So the business really likes us a little better than before. Okay, and the test scripts, those are actually where the scripts are that you execute from. And when we were doing our development, we kept everything on a dashboard, et cetera, to show you the different module, which scripts were done, et cetera, et cetera. It's more than 119 now, obviously. It's 125. Okay, well, the last 5 releases have not involved any users testing at all. And so what we do is we actually run them. We print out all of the screen prints and the results, and we give it to them for review, and they say, yep. And that's done. So all they have to do is review and sign. Okay. Test cycle times, 50%. The automated tests run. It's a lot less time than when you manually have to do it, definitely. Even this little one would have taken us maybe about 10, 12 minutes to do. It took 2.5 minutes. And there's less issues in post-production tests when we actually have these repeatable tests. You know what happens when you're manual? You do a manual test, and then next time you have to run it, you go, yeah, I'll do that. And you're not as kind of disciplined maybe the second time around, whatever it is. These things run the same test again and again. And we're finding less problems in post-production tests and in production after that's done. Are we...
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to hand it back to JB, who's going to wrap this all up. You know, wrap this all up as, you know, this was the functional regressing user interface testing and the back-end integrity testing that he was presenting in the CAB meeting.
Right. Thanks, Bruce. So I wanted to wrap up by putting this slide together and essentially talk about where we are going with this and what we're working on. And you know, when you look at testing, you can put it into 3 separate boxes of you know, ways you can actually execute that type of testing. And like you've seen, you know, that test you've seen here, where you go to the search page and you click, you know, on the items, and you make sure the items is there. And so that lets you do a certain level of testing, but then what we are introducing is something called, you know, and we are working on actually currently in phase 1, is something called a new rapid, it's ACT, and it's actually automated functional backend testing. And this one is more focused on very large test case, integration test case, things that will take really long time to do if you were to, you know, do the test. So that includes loading. The best candidates when I think about this is think about you're going to implement your pricing rules, and you're going to set up the, you know, all that logic once, and you don't want to have to create like all those contracts manually or spend all that time to create that set of 40 contracts all the time and spend too much time on it, because the reason why I think there is good fit based on what you're trying to automate and what's important to your business is because each of those options are essentially different based on what you're trying to test and what you're trying to do, you know. And so I know there are cases where, for example, formulary evaluation, which is a very good candidate, where you have all those configurations and you're trying to change one configuration. You want to make sure that you're able to automate that at a minimum cost, you know, because part of it is what Bruce is talking about is more UI, and it sometimes is maybe longer to complete if you want to do back-end testing. It's less of a, because back-end testing you need to look at the database, you need to do all the data flow, you need to run the jobs, make sure they complete, so there is much more integration happening here.
Mm. Yes, if we, you know, with some of our functional testing, we might test up to a certain point and say, okay, this is done. You know, we've done a contract, we've activated a program, and then we could go on to rebates, but we're not testing whether they, you know, if sales came in, they bucketed, right? That's a long-term type of thing. So when you have things that are happening, like for instance, when you mark something is being paid, like a Medicaid payment is paid, it actually begins to go out and do a whole bunch of other work. When you're looking at UI, you're going, oh, I did paid and it's saved and everything is fine. But the actual work that's done behind the scenes, did that actually go to where it's supposed to go, back at the table? So that's the important part of that testing offering.